The endings of Elden Ring are tricky. From Software likes leaving things up to interpretation. That lets each player create their own story out of their own playthrough. That also means that each ending is going to have some sort of justification saying why it's the good one. Though I think if we look at the themes and motivations of the game, and what kind of experience the game is designed to bring about, we can find an ending that matches up with those themes. We can determine which ending is best. So Elden Ring has 6 endings in total, but 4 of those are variants of the same ending, so it only gives achievements for the 3 main endings: the Elden Lord, the Age of the Stars, and the Lord of Frenzied Flame. At this point, I want to note that we need to understand what happens in each ending before we can determine which is best. So if you haven't watched my video explaining all 6 endings, I'd recommend you go do that now. And those of you that have watched that video can probably guess which ending I'm going to conclude is best in this video. That is, to present my biases from the start, I think the best ending is the Age of the Stars. The ending in which the witch Ranni ushers in the age of the moon, stars, and chilled night sky. And rest assured I have my reasons for this. In looking at the themes, messages, and moral of the story of Elden Ring, I think the Age of the Stars lines up best when compared with the other 2 endings. And yes, as I said, there are 4 different variants that make up the Elden Lord ending. However, I think their differences aren't as relevant as their overarching similarities when it comes to determining the best ending. The Elden Lord endings vary in how we modify the Elden Ring to create a new order. In-game, this means they vary based on which mending rune we choose to repair the Elden Ring with. But in all the endings, we are repairing the Elden Ring. In doing so, we are following the guidance of the Two Fingers. Yeah, we maybe commit a cardinal sin by burning the Erd Tree, but even Enya seems pretty okay with that. In following this path, we are going through with the plans and desires of the Greater Will, an outer god and the creator and source of the Elden Beast and the Elden Ring. Sure, we can choose which kind of order we want to install through the Elden Ring, one that changes nothing, one that attempts to perfect the previous order, one that brings back death, or one that creates a world of curse modeled after the Omen. But all of these options are just different flavors of an Elden Ring based order. The mending runes represent the visions of the NPCs they come from, what each one felt that the world needed most. The vanilla Age of Fracture can be seen as the tarnished player character deciding themselves that no change is needed, just a simple restart. But as I discussed in my previous video, this ending, the Age of Fracture, along with all of the other Elden Lord endings, harkens back to the relinking endings of Dark Souls 1 and 3. And in all of these examples, we can see that, despite their desire to leave things open for the player, FromSoft pretty strongly signifies that these endings are not right or fully satisfying. Stagnation and simply resetting the age are themes categorically condemned in these games. A reset, simple or with an added flair, leads to stagnation and the stifling of growth, an elimination of the chance for progress. And that is what we get with the Elden Lord endings, even with those of the Mending Runes. None of their changes are revolutionary, so the order of the Elden Ring remains in all of their new worlds. Worlds that are subject to the Greater Will, and, in all likelihood, will at some point fail and return to where this game begins, in a broken world in need of saving, in need of change. So if we rule out the Elden Lord ending, we are left with 2 options: the Age of the Stars and the Lord of Frenzied Flame. Let's first see if the ending of Frenzied Flame can fit the bill of a proper FromSoft end. After all, you are very explicitly not following the Greater Will's path or the guidance of the Two Fingers. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is associated with the Three Fingers and the mysterious entity behind them and the frenzy-based incantations, a possible outer god of Frenzied Flame. But wait, it sounds like we just switched out one otherworldly outer god for another. If the Elden Lord ending was doing the bidding of the Greater Will, is this ending just doing the bidding of the Frenzied Flame? Yeah, that's pretty much correct. If you finish Hayata's questline, she'll be nearby when you trigger the Frenzied Flame ending condition. I'll also take a second to note that Hayata originally wanted to become a normal maiden, but was led down the path of the Three Fingers unknowingly. Shabriri grapes were the only thing that gave her vision, which she thought of as her guiding grace.
But when I eat one of those grapes, I can feel a distant light in the back of my eyes. It will lead me to my true duty as a finger maiden.
Eventually, she became fully dependent on them and saw the path of the Three Fingers as the only way to become a maiden. She was brought down this path not as a free agent, but as someone tricked by a greater being. So after being caressed by the Three Fingers, she has quite a lot to say. She explains that you're now on the path of the Three Fingers' bidding. So if the Frenzied Flame guides the Three Fingers, now you're on its payroll too. Hayata also gives the explanation of what the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is all about, correcting the mistake of the Greater Will, melting everything back into the perfect unity, the one great, that existed before the Greater Will divided things into souls and separate living beings. This will supposedly do away with all the anguish, sins, and torments of the world. Things the Three Fingers say were started by the Greater Will, creating divisions and individuals. Everything will be better, burned into a supernatural singularity of bliss. So once again, we find an ending that is a manifestation of the will of an outer god. And on top of that, it is a rejection of all the most crucial aspects of human, or tarnished, life. The Frenzied Flame sees despair and sin as blemishes to be avoided, to be subsumed in a blissful state of non-existence, where identity of the individual is gone. But these experiences are precisely what make our lives our own. We suffer and struggle and strive to overcome. We live as individuals burdened with these weights, but also as those who can experience the joy of overcoming them. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending breaks from the Greater Will, but only to run into the more plentiful appendages of the Three Fingers and Frenzied Flame. At the same time, it denies the struggles, trials, and overcoming that demarcate not only our lives, but also the very core of From Software games. These Soulsborne Akiro Ring games that From Software has been making for over a decade are notorious for difficulty in an era of games where most mainstream titles seek not to emphasize struggle as part of their experience. Miyazaki has stated that a vital part of FromSoft's game design is hardship, saying in a New Yorker interview, "In our game specifically, hardship is what gives meaning to the experience. So it's not something we're willing to abandon at the moment. It's our identity." This dedication to hardship is something that is at the core of the Souls experience, and part of what makes these games so good. Philosopher Zach Jurgensen wrote about this concept in his PhD dissertation, saying that games that are too easy or require little attention to rules of skill fail to take full advantage of what sets video games apart from other artistic mediums: the potential for a highly immersive, interactive experience. Easy games negate the value of working within the video game medium. Difficulty, struggle, and to quote Miyazaki again, the joy that comes from overcoming hardship are what makes these games, both in story and in gameplay. Miyazaki admits that Elden Ring is a bit more approachable on these fronts, with the extra America checkpoints and Ashen Spirits and whatnot, but it still fully embraces these principles of difficulty. When we try to find which ending is the best fit for Elden Ring, it should be one that embraces these concepts. And it's clear that the Lord of Frenzied Flame, with its running away from despair, does not. And that leaves one final option, the Age of the Stars. And guess what? It embraces these themes of trial and tribulation with open arms. 2 sets of open arms, in fact. In contrast with the Frenzied End, the Age of Stars has Ranni acknowledge the individuality of every living being and every living soul. It accepts and actively takes on fear, doubt, and loneliness. It is a path which stretcheth into darkness. This ending does not shy away from pain or darkness or the trials of this world. Ranni basically says that this path will be a difficult one, but she recognizes that a pained life of freedom is more valuable than a blissful life of servitude. This ending is the best at fulfilling and realizing the game direction of Miyazaki and From Software. It defends the joy that comes from overcoming hardship. It is also the best at mirroring the story direction of creating one's own story. Like the ending of Frenzied Flame, the Age of Stars is a rejection of the Greater Will and the established failed world of the Elden Ring. Unlike it though, the Age of Stars does not simply trade one outer god for another. Some have theorized that the moon or stars stand as another outer god, but I have not seen any real substantiation of this. And every other outer god we know of is not simply some elemental entity like the stars or moon, but they are something more specific, whether that be the Greater Will, the Formless Mother, or the potentially mistaken Rot Goddess. This ending is the culmination of Ranni's plan. She was born into a world that gave her a strict role as Empyrean. She was supposed to fall in line and follow the path laid out by the Two Fingers, and by extension, the Greater Will. But instead, she decided to make her own path, to reject the Two Fingers and the world of stagnation found in the current state of the lands between. The Age of the Stars is the final step in that path. It is a severance of the old ways, and an allowance for the world to make its own new way. In this way, it lines up with FromSoft's design of letting the player make their own story. And Ranni is also not someone who asks for our help at the beginning of the game. She is pursuing her own plan with no intention of our involvement. Only through our meddling and choosing to help her out, for our own in-game benefit at the start to be fair, does she eventually seek our help. The decision is ours, and it is not one which beckons to some great god, but to a dark path guided by the light of the inanimate stars and moon. In choosing Ranni's ending and realizing her path, we are taking the final step in her plan to be free from some great god directing our life and the world. We may be assisting another, but by doing so out of our own independent choice, and because we do so to allow the world the chance at its own story, we are choosing the ending most in line with the game's themes of freedom and hardship. It's also important to note the contrast between us choosing Ranni's ending and Hayata being strung along by the Three Fingers in the Lord of Frenzied Flame ending. In choosing to make our own story, in embracing the joy of struggle and hardship, the Age of the Stars is the ending to Elden Ring that fits with the game's themes, direction, and setting. It is a pristine culmination of the message of the game, forging one's own path through the hardships of the world. And hey, we get an Eternal Maiden out of it, too. In judging the endings of Elden Ring, it is clear as the full moon, the Age of the Stars is best. Of course, every player doesn't have to choose the best ending for their favorite. As I said, part of the whole point of the game is making your own story, so players can choose the ending that best fits them and/or their playthrough's roleplay. There is merit and plenty of value to each of the endings, so don't let this video's view constrain your playing and enjoyment. And of course, this is my interpretation supported by argument. You don't have to agree, but if you want to say that you don't agree, you better have some good reasons. If you do, why don't you share them in the comments? Discuss your views on the endings and which one might be best. And if you enjoyed the video, subscribe. It lets me know that I should keep doing more of this kind of content. Well, that's all I have. Thank you for watching.